The studio lights were bright, the cameras were rolling, and millions of viewers were tuned in. What was supposed to be a regular live television debate about combat sports was slowly turning into something far more dangerous. Steven Seagal sat calmly in his chair, dressed neatly, relaxed, almost detached from the noise around him. He wasn't there to prove anything. He had been invited as a guest to talk about martial arts, discipline, and philosophy, topics he had spent decades mastering. Across from him sat a 350-pound professional wrestler, a man known more for his size and loud personality than for restraint. From the moment the show started, the wrestler's tone was aggressive. He laughed at Aikido, calling it movie fighting, and claiming it wouldn't work in the real world. Steven didn't interrupt. He didn't argue. He simply listened. And that silence, it bothered the wrestler. As the minutes passed, the wrestler grew bolder. He leaned forward, raised his voice, and began mocking Steven personally, not just his martial art, but his reputation. The audience laughed nervously. Some thought it was scripted. Others felt something was off. Then it happened. The wrestler suddenly stood up. Before anyone could react, he stepped into Steven Seagal's personal space and grabbed him by the collar, live on television. The studio froze. Gasps echoed from the audience. The host didn't know whether to intervene. Security hesitated, unsure if this was part of the show or a real confrontation. Cameras zoomed in automatically, capturing every second. Steven Seagal didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look afraid. He slowly looked up at the wrestler, calm and steady, and asked him to step back. Moments like this are where ego becomes dangerous. When someone believes size and volume equal power, they often underestimate calm control, especially on live TV, where pride can override common sense. The wrestler smirked, clearly enjoying the attention. Ratings were climbing. Producers were watching closely from behind the scenes, torn between stopping the show and letting the drama continue. But what no one realized in that moment was this. They weren't watching a debate anymore. They were watching a test of restraint versus ego. At this point, do you think the wrestler crossed the line, or was Steven Seagal right to stay calm and let it play out? Share your opinion in the comments below. The tension in the studio didn't disappear after the collar grab, it thickened. The wrestler didn't let go. Instead, he leaned closer, towering over Steven Seagal, clearly enjoying the moment. The cameras caught every detail, the clenched jaw, the forced grin, the way his grip tightened as if daring Steven to react. Steven remained seated. His voice stayed calm, almost quiet, as he asked again for the wrestler to step back. No insults. No threats. Just a clear boundary. That calm response only fueled the wrestler further. He laughed loudly, mocking Steven for not standing up. He looked toward the cameras, flexing slightly, playing to the crowd. It was obvious now, this wasn't about martial arts anymore. This was about dominance, ego, and public humiliation. The studio audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some people laughed nervously. Others whispered. A few could already sense that this situation was slipping out of control. Behind the cameras, producers stared at their monitors. Live television thrives on drama, but there's a line, and this moment was dangerously close to crossing it. Ratings were climbing fast, but so was the risk. Security guards exchanged looks. Should they step in? Was this scripted? Or was this turning into a real confrontation? Steven Seagal finally spoke again, his tone steady but firmer this time. He told the wrestler that grabbing someone like that was unnecessary and disrespectful. He didn't raise his voice, and that contrast was powerful. The louder the wrestler became, the more controlled Steven appeared. In moments like these, calm isn't weakness, it's discipline. Many confrontations escalate because one person refuses to be pulled into chaos, and that frustrates the aggressor even more. The wrestler scoffed, claiming that real fighters don't sit still. He said size and strength decide everything. He said techniques don't matter when someone is this big. As he spoke, his grip loosened slightly, but his posture remained aggressive. Cameras zoomed in again. This wasn't just a studio argument anymore. Millions of viewers at home were now fully locked in, watching to see who would break first. Steven didn't look at the cameras. He didn't look at the host. He kept his eyes on the wrestler. And for the first time, The room went quiet. You could feel it, that moment where everyone realizes something important is about to happen. Before we continue, tell us, which country and city are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments and let's see how far this moment reached around the world. The wrestler finally released Steven's collar, but he didn't step back. Instead, he stayed close, chest puffed out, daring Steven to stand up. Steven adjusted slightly in his chair. Not in fear, but in preparation. Some viewers noticed it immediately. Others didn't. But anyone with real martial arts experience knew something had shifted. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about control. And the wrestler had no idea what was coming next. The moment the wrestler loosened his grip, most people in the studio thought the danger had passed. They were wrong. Instead of stepping back, the 350-pound wrestler leaned in even closer. His chest was puffed out, his fists clenched at his sides. He wasn't shouting anymore, and that change alone made the situation more unsettling. His voice dropped, slower and sharper, as if he wanted everyone to hear every word. "So this is the legend," he sneered. "This is what Hollywood calls dangerous." Steven Seagal didn't answer immediately. He adjusted slightly in his chair, not nervously, not defensively, but deliberately. His back straightened. His shoulders relaxed instead of tightening. To most viewers, it looked like nothing. To trained eyes, it was everything. Security took another step forward. The host glanced repeatedly at his cue cards, clearly unsure what to say next. The studio audience sat frozen, caught between excitement and fear. This no longer felt like entertainment. It felt like something that had slipped off the script completely. The wrestler suddenly placed a hand on Steven's shoulder, not gripping, but pressing. A subtle shove followed. Not hard. Just enough to test him. A collective gasp filled the studio. Steven looked up calmly, his expression unchanged. He spoke quietly, but his words cut through the tension. "You should step back," he said. "This isn't necessary." The wrestler laughed again, but this time, the laugh sounded forced. When someone relies on intimidation, they expect fear. When fear doesn't appear, confusion sets in. And confusion often turns into recklessness. The wrestler shoved again. Slightly harder this time. Security moved closer, now only a few steps away, but they still hesitated. If this was part of the show, interfering could cost jobs. If it wasn't, waiting could cost someone their safety. The cameras kept rolling. Steven Seagal did something that almost no one noticed. He placed his feet flat on the floor. Not bracing. Not preparing to strike. Just grounding himself. Martial artists watching from home leaned closer to their screens. Online, later, this exact moment would be replayed frame by frame. Because this was the second everything changed. The wrestler mistook silence for surrender. He leaned down, bringing his face inches from Steven's. The size difference was overwhelming, nearly 200 pounds heavier, towering over him, blocking the lights above. To anyone else, this would have been terrifying. Steven's breathing didn't change. He didn't clench his fists. He didn't stand up. He simply waited. True control isn't about speed or strength, it's about timing. Knowing when not to move is often more powerful than acting too early. The wrestler raised his voice again, demanding Steven stand up like a real man. He gestured wildly, turning slightly toward the cameras, feeding off the attention. That brief turn was all it took. Steven's posture shifted again, subtle, efficient, precise. No wasted movement. No aggression. Just readiness. The audience felt it, even if they couldn't explain it. The room went unnaturally quiet. Even the wrestler seemed to sense something was different now. His confidence flickered for just a second. But ego doesn't retreat easily. He shoved Steven one more time. This time, it wasn't testing. It was a mistake. Be honest, if you were sitting there, humiliated on live TV, with millions watching, would you stay calm like Steven, or would you fight back? Comment calm or fight below. Steven's eyes never left the wrestler's face. No anger. No fear. Just focus. The host opened his mouth to speak, then stopped. Security froze mid-step. Somewhere in the control room, A producer reached for a switch but hesitated. Everyone felt it. This situation had reached the point where words were no longer enough. And whatever happened next was going to happen fast. For a brief second, time seemed to slow down. The wrestler's final shove echoed louder than it should have, not because of force, but because of what it meant. This was no longer posturing. This was no longer television drama. It was real. Steven Seagal didn't raise his voice. He didn't stand up aggressively. He didn't even look surprised. Instead, he moved. Not fast. Not slow. Precisely. Most viewers would later say they didn't see it happen, only the result. That's because what Steven did wasn't designed to be flashy. It wasn't meant to impress cameras. It was meant to end the confrontation without escalating it. As the wrestler leaned forward again, Steven shifted his upper body just slightly to the side. At the same time, his hand came up, not striking, not grabbing violently, but redirecting. The wrestler's own momentum betrayed him. For a man weighing over 350 pounds, balance is everything. And in that split second, balance was gone. The wrestler's face changed instantly. The confidence vanished, replaced by confusion, then panic. His feet scrambled to catch up with his upper body, but they couldn't. He stumbled forward. The audience gasped, not loudly, but sharply, as if everyone inhaled at the same time. Steven was already letting go. No follow-up. No slam. No display of dominance. Just enough movement to prove a point. The wrestler staggered back, nearly falling. He didn't hit the ground, but he came close enough that everyone understood what had just happened. And then, the broadcast cut mid-second. No transition. No music. No explanation. Just silence. Live television is controlled chaos. When producers cut a feed without warning, it means something happened that couldn't be managed, replayed, or explained in real time. Inside the studio, confusion exploded. The host shouted for security. Crew members rushed in from off-camera. The wrestler, now red-faced and furious, tried to shout over everyone else, insisting nothing had happened, that it was all fake. But his shaking hands told a different story. Security stepped between them immediately, pulling the wrestler back. Not because Steven attacked him, but because they feared what the wrestler might do next. Steven Seagal stood up slowly. Not to challenge. Not to celebrate. He simply adjusted his jacket. The contrast was unsettling. One man was breathing heavily, shouting, pacing. The other looked like he had just stood up from a normal conversation. Producers stormed onto the set, arguing loudly. Some demanded the cameras stay off. Others wanted an explanation ready in case the feed resumed. Lawyers were already being called. "What exactly did he do?" one crew member whispered. No one answered. Because no one could explain it in simple terms. From the control room, technicians rewound the footage frame by frame. Even slowed down, it didn't look dramatic. There was no punch. No throw. No obvious force. And yet, the outcome was undeniable. This is why subtle skill is often misunderstood. People expect power to look violent. When it doesn't, they struggle to process how effective it really is. The wrestler demanded the feed be restored so he could explain himself. Producers refused. Steven was approached by a stage manager, who asked if he wanted to make a statement before the show resumed. Steven shook his head. He spoke quietly, but several crew members heard him. "I asked him to let go," he said. "That's all. No excuses. No insults. No victory speech." The decision was made. The show would not return to live broadcast. Instead, producers rolled pre-recorded content, hoping viewers would forget what they had just witnessed. They underestimated the internet. Audience members had already pulled out their phones before the cut. Some recorded the screen. Others captured what happened inside the studio after the cameras went dark. Within minutes, clips were being uploaded. Within hours, people were asking the same question. What really happened in those few seconds the public wasn't supposed to see? And the answer was about to change everything. The moment the cameras went dark, everything changed. What viewers at home didn't see was the sudden eruption of chaos inside the studio. Crew members rushed in from every direction. Security guards moved fast, forming a barrier between Steven Seagal and the wrestler, not because Steven posed a threat, but because the wrestler clearly did. The 350-pound man was furious now. His face burned red with embarrassment. He shouted at producers, at security, at anyone who would listen. He demanded the cameras be turned back on. He claimed the audience needed to see the truth. But no one was listening. Steven Seagal stood a few feet away, calm and silent. He didn't pace. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look at the wrestler anymore. Instead, he calmly straightened his jacket, as if the interruption had been nothing more than an inconvenience. That contrast made everyone uncomfortable. One man was losing control in front of dozens of witnesses. The other looked like he had already moved on. After public humiliation, people often react with anger to protect their ego. Calm, on the other hand, usually comes from confidence, not in strength, but in self-control. Producers gathered near the stage, voices overlapping, arguments breaking out. Some wanted to resume the show immediately and pretend nothing happened. Others were already thinking about legal consequences. Live TV incidents don't disappear, they multiply. What exactly did he do? A producer asked. No one answered clearly. That was the problem. Security replayed the footage on a nearby monitor. Slowed down. Frame by frame. Still, it was hard to describe. There was no dramatic throw. No obvious strike. Just a brief shift, a loss of balance, and a near fall. And yet the result was undeniable. The wrestler had lost control, physically and emotionally. The host approached Steven carefully and asked if he wanted to explain what happened on camera once the show resumed. Steven shook his head. I don't think that's necessary, he said calmly. That answer surprised everyone. In moments like these, most people rush to defend themselves publicly. Steven didn't. He didn't need validation. He didn't need applause. He had drawn his line, and enforced it without violence. The wrestler continued to shout, claiming the move was staged, demanding a rematch, accusing the network of protecting Steven. Security eventually guided him away from the stage, still yelling over his shoulder. Studio staff watched in silence. They had all felt it. Something had shifted in that room. True authority doesn't need to announce itself. When someone demonstrates restraint under pressure, it often leaves a deeper impression than any show of force. Producers finally made a decision. The live show would not return. Instead, they would air a pre-recorded segment and release a short statement later, claiming technical difficulties. It was safer, cleaner, less risky. But safety doesn't exist once the public is involved. In the audience, several people were already checking their phones. Some had recorded the moment before the cut. Others had captured what happened afterward, the shouting, the security response, the confusion. Steven noticed one young crew member staring at him, wide-eyed. Are you okay? Steven asked him quietly. The crew member nodded, almost embarrassed. He admitted he had expected something very different. Anger, retaliation, chaos. Steven smiled slightly. Most people do, he said. That single sentence would later be repeated online thousands of times. Before leaving the studio, Steven was asked one final question by a senior producer. Do you want us to make a statement defending you? Steven paused. Just say I asked him to let go, he replied. Nothing more. No explanation. No justification. No accusation. As Steven walked out of the studio, the atmosphere remained tense. People whispered. Some nodded respectfully. Others looked confused, still trying to understand what they had witnessed. Outside, production assistants were already scrolling through social media. Clips were appearing. Comments were exploding. And the narrative was slipping out of the network's control. At this point, do you think Steven did the right thing by staying silent, or should he have explained himself publicly right away? Share your thoughts in the comments. Inside the studio, producers realized the truth too late. Cutting the feed hadn't ended the story. It had only made people more curious. And what came next would be far bigger than live television ever could be. The producers thought cutting the live feed would contain the damage. They were wrong. Within an hour of the broadcast ending, short, shaky videos began appearing online. Some were filmed from inside the studio audience. Others were recordings of television screens, captured just seconds before the feed went black. None of them showed the full picture, but together they told a story that the network could no longer control. Social media exploded. What just happened? Why did they cut the feed? Did Steven Seagal really drop a 350-pound wrestler without throwing a punch? Clips were slowed down, zoomed in, replayed again and again. People argued in comment sections, forums, and group chats. Some viewers claimed it was staged. Others said they had seen enough to know it wasn't. And then the experts stepped in. Martial artists began breaking down the footage frame by frame. They pointed out small details most people missed: the shift in balance, the angle of Steven's body, the way the wrestler's own momentum worked against him. They explained something important. Steven didn't overpower the wrestler. He redirected him. When something doesn't look violent, people often assume it isn't powerful. But control-based techniques are designed to end a situation quickly and quietly, which is exactly why they confuse people who expect chaos. As these explanations spread, public opinion started to change. Slowly at first. Then all at once. People who had mocked Steven's calm demeanor in Part 1 were now praising it. Commenters began pointing out how the wrestler escalated every step of the situation, while Steven repeatedly tried to de-escalate. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, the wrestler released a statement of his own. He claimed the entire moment was scripted. He accused the network of editing footage unfairly. He insisted that Steven had cheated by using techniques that weren't allowed on television. The response was brutal. People didn't believe him.
Why?
Because humiliation is hard to fake, and even harder to hide. Videos surfaced showing the wrestler shouting backstage, being restrained by security, pacing in frustration. None of it matched the story he was telling. Steven Seagal, on the other hand, said nothing. No interviews. No social media posts. No public defense. That silence became powerful. When two stories exist, the one that doesn't need defending often feels more believable. Major sports pages picked up the story. So did martial arts channels, reaction streamers, and commentators who specialized in body language and conflict psychology. Everyone had an opinion. And now it was time for the audience to have theirs. Do you think the producers were right to cut the live feed, or should they have let the world see exactly what happened? Type cut if you agree with the producers. Type show if you think the footage should have stayed live. As the debate raged, something unexpected happened. People began sharing personal stories. Stories about being underestimated. Stories about staying calm while being provoked. Stories about restraint being mistaken for weakness. Steven's silence allowed others to speak. And that made the moment bigger than television. The network finally released a short statement, citing unexpected conduct and safety concerns. It satisfied no one. Viewers demanded the full footage. Hashtags began trending. The attempt to bury the moment had done the opposite. It had immortalized it. Late that night, a longer clip surfaced, recorded from a better angle inside the studio. It didn't show everything, but it showed enough. The balance shift. The stumble. The exact moment control changed hands. That clip went viral within minutes. Millions watched it. Millions replayed it. And millions reached the same conclusion. This wasn't about strength. It was about mastery. After seeing everything that leaked, has your opinion changed since Part 1? Let us know in the comments. Did this moment earn Steven more respect in your eyes? By the next morning, the wrestler's name was trending, but not the way he wanted. Steven Seagal's name trended too, but for a different reason. People weren't praising violence. They were praising restraint. And in a world addicted to chaos, that made this moment unforgettable. By the end of the week, the incident was no longer just a viral clip. It had become a conversation. Not about wrestling. Not about television drama. But about something much deeper: how power is expressed when no one expects it. Steven Seagal never gave an interview. He never posted an explanation. He didn't defend himself or attack anyone involved. While the internet argued, analyzed, and speculated, he stayed silent. And strangely, that silence spoke louder than words. Talk shows debated the moment. Martial artists broke down the technique. Psychologists analyzed the body language. Commentators pointed out how easily the situation could have turned violent, and how it didn't. Because one man refused to let ego take control. In a world where people are rewarded for reacting loudly, restraint often feels invisible. But when you zoom out, restraint is what prevents chaos. It's what separates confidence from insecurity. The wrestler eventually disappeared from the headlines. His attempts to reclaim the narrative failed. Each new statement only reminded people of what they had already seen: anger, embarrassment, and loss of control. Steven's name, on the other hand, was being discussed differently now. Not as a movie star. Not as a controversial figure. But as someone who demonstrated composure under pressure. Fans shared stories of moments when they were provoked but chose not to escalate. Parents commented about teaching their kids the difference between strength and aggression. Martial artists explained how discipline begins long before physical technique. What started as a TV confrontation had turned into a lesson. Steven finally broke his silence weeks later, not in an interview, but in a small private seminar. A student asked him why he didn't respond publicly. Steven paused before answering. "Because the moment wasn't about me," he said. "It was about choice." That answer spread online almost as fast as the original clip. Real confidence doesn't chase approval. It doesn't need the last word. It understands that reactions fade, but character lasts. People realized something important in hindsight. If Steven had exploded, if he had thrown a punch, if he had humiliated the wrestler publicly, the story would have ended differently. It would have been just another viral fight. Instead, it became something rare, a reminder that power can be quiet, and control can be absolute without being cruel. The producers who cut the feed thought they were protecting themselves. In reality, they preserved a mystery that made the moment legendary. What wasn't shown forced people to think, to question, to analyze. And that's why the story stayed alive. Because sometimes, what you don't see leaves the strongest impression. Looking back now, do you think this moment changed how people view strength and respect? Did it change how you would handle a confrontation? Share your honest thoughts below. Years from now, people may forget the exact details. They may argue about what really happened in that split second. But they will remember this. A much larger man tried to dominate another on live television. And instead of reacting with anger, Steven Seagal chose restraint. And restraint won. That's the legacy of that moment. Not a takedown, not a victory, not humiliation. But a choice. A choice to stay calm when provoked. A choice to act only when necessary. A choice to let character speak louder than force. If you believe real strength is staying calm under pressure, type respect in the comments. And if you want more true stories where discipline defeats ego, don't forget to subscribe. Because sometimes, the most powerful moments are the ones they tried to hide.